Now that we've reached about the midway point of the Premier League season, I'd like to take a look at the current table standings and try and make a prediction of the title winner and top four and give an overall review of the season so far. Now, I took down some notes, and this is one of the tightest Premier League seasons I think I've ever seen, where the amount of teams that are close to each other, the amount of games that can, the amount of games that can be just that can just flip the title race, or games that can flip who's in the top four, games that can flip positions overall in the top 10 is really crazy. So, in between first place and ninth place, there is a 7 point gap. So, that's between Liverpool, who's in first, and West Ham, who is 10th. There is a 7 point gap. The reason why the race is so tight is because a lot of the top teams have been struggling to find form where others aren't. So earlier in the season, Liverpool weren't necessarily in bad form. They just had that one bad game against Aston Villa, where Manchester City were struggling earlier on. Manchester United were struggling earlier on. Everton was doing good. Chelsea was doing good earlier on the season. Leicester City as well. Then afterwards, Tottenham's bad spell then came after that, where Manchester United started climbing back. Liverpool were performing consistently. Leicester City they had their drought. Manchester City were starting to gain form again. Everton were dropping. Chelsea were still continuing on with their form. And then as of recently, we can see that Liverpool's form is starting to drop, while Manchester United are maintaining their form. Leicester City have gotten back to form. Tottenham are still in a bit of murky water. They still have some good results and some bad results at this point. Manchester City are back on. They're starting to pick up their form again. Chelsea have fallen off as well with Liverpool. They haven't really performed in the last 3 games. Everton have been performing similar to Tottenham, where it's good here, bad there. So we can see that among the top teams that anyone would really genuinely consider title contenders, we can see that there is a bit of there's a lot of fluctuation in their results. Now, one of the reasons why there could be all these fluctuations is for the teams that I listed, all of them play in Europe. So whether the European games that they have to play are easier for them to deal with, so they don't need to necessarily play all the top players, or if they do have a tough opponent midweek, they need to play their best team possible for points to get out of the group. So, that could also affect the team's results in the league, as well as their overall performances. There is a current tie between first and second, and that current tie is between Liverpool and Manchester United, who are tied on 33 points. Manchester United have a game in hand, and if they win that game in hand, they are now league leaders with 36 points, 3 ahead of Liverpool. Looking at third place, standing alone is Leicester City at 32 points, 1 behind the current leaders, which is joint leaders, Liverpool and Manchester United. Then, from 4th place to 7th place, we have Tottenham, Manchester City, Southampton, and Everton all tied. But of those 3 of those 4 teams just listed, all 3 of those 3 have games in hand. Tottenham has 1 game in hand, Manchester City has 2 games in hand, and Everton has 1 game in hand. Now, the big one here is actually Manchester City, because if Manchester City win both of their games in hand, they can go top as well, because they'll gain 6 points, and they'll have 35, and they'll be ahead of Manchester United and Liverpool by 2. This is if Manchester United draws or loses their game in hand. From 8th to 10th, there are 3 teams on 26 points, which are Aston Villa, Chelsea, and West Ham. And of those 3 teams, only 1 has any games in hand, which is Aston Villa, and they have 2. So if they win both of their games, they go up to they're tied with Leicester. They'd be tied with Leicester City on points. They would be tied with Tottenham if Tottenham won their game. But that's the problem. You can't necessarily say, if they win all their games, they'll go ahead of this team, and if this team wins, they'll be tied, because in some of the games in hand, these teams are facing off against each other. So in the games in hand that these teams still have to play out, Manchester United has to play out Burnley, Everton need to play Wolves, Aston Villa need to play Spurs. So they both have a game in hand, and they could either draw, whatever it may be, but they both still have that game in hand. So it's kind of dumb to say, if they all win their games in hand, it's hard to calculate, but we'll just go off of what we have now. Manchester City actually played Brighton. Arsenal played Crystal Palace. And then after that, it then resumes to normal playing. Every team in this top 10 has dealt with a bad stretch of games, whether it's over 3 games, whether it's over 4 games, whatever it may be. Every team's dealt with their struggles. So it's kind of hard to say that, Liverpool have thrown the title, or Liverpool are losing the title race, they're losing their grip. Realistically, if the team that could gain the biggest point advantage against them is Manchester United with 3 points, they play against Manchester United in about 2 weeks' time on the 17th. So if Liverpool win that game, and Manchester United win their game in hand against Burnley, they would be tied on points. Liverpool would still be in that top 3, top 2 race if they beat Manchester United, which I do believe their talent and their ability says that they should win that game. But as we've learned over this whole season, what teams should do is not what they're doing. And I think that speaks for a multitude of factors. There's no fans, so there's no home field advantage. There's a lot more games to play. The Premier League is the only league in the world that actually doesn't allow 5 substitutions, whereas most other leagues do. So they're only making up to 3 substitutions. The players are getting tired. Like I said earlier, they play way more games. They're playing in Europe. A lot of these big teams that we've seen fallen off. And so it's hard to make a decision as to who's going to win the title. Liverpool's actually coming up against a tough stretch of games where they're drawing. They're not being as clinical as they usually are. Now, you can break this down to the fact that they haven't had maybe a break. They have more injuries, but a lot of the injuries that they've had are mainly in the defensive side. They're not necessarily on the offensive side. So the excuses of attacking injuries not being, or the amount of injuries in attack is limiting their creativity is not necessarily as viable, because the only attacking player injured is Jota. But I will say that some of the teams that are starting to come up are teams that have had a bit more rest compared to Liverpool. So teams that have a game in hand have had a bit more time to rest their players, because they're either playing the weaker cups, or due to COVID, they've had their games called off. So like Manchester City we're supposed to play Everton, I believe, last week, and their game was called off. So that gave Manchester City an extended amount of time to have their players rest, relax, and that's why you could see when they played against Chelsea, there was a clear lack in pace, determination, and fight in between, the disparity between the two teams. Now that a lot of these teams are going to be playing their games in hand, Liverpool won't be playing as many games in comparison to most of them. So this is Liverpool's opportunity now to rest their players, fix their problems, get back to scoring goals, and get back in to dominating opposing teams, whether top 6, top 10, or bottom 10, whatever it may be. As I said, I do believe Liverpool will win the title. I think last year was proof enough. They didn't have a lot of different changes in comparison to last year. They have pretty much the same squad as they do now, except they added Thiago and Jota. They haven't really lost I don't think they lost any notable players in comparison to last season. And last season, before COVID, they basically had the league on ropes. They were ahead by 15 plus points. There wasn't really... Everyone knew they were going to win the league. It was just waiting for COVID to be over and done with for it to be confirmed. But all in all, Liverpool were dominating last year. Now with them having to play more... Actually, everyone has to play more games, so the excuse doesn't really work. But with the squad overall having to play more games, and there being a lot more injuries, they're being a bit stretched. So that's why you can see that their results have maybe been catching up to them. They've been lacking a little bit. So this break should be good for them. And I think once they get Van Dijk back, Matip, Gomez, I think once their attack gets in a good rhythm, because as I've said, their defense hasn't been lacking. It's just their attack. Their defense hasn't been lacking, but their offense has been struggling to just, take shots and score goals. So once they fix that issue, it won't necessarily be as much of a problem. Manchester United, Tottenham, and Manchester City will be the remaining top 4. Now, the reason for that is because Leicester City, although they may be performing well now, their defense is a bit of an issue. When they win games, they usually have to score more than when they win games, they're not convincing wins. It's what I'm trying to say. They're not convincing wins where they're dominant over their opponent and they're just, controlling the game. So I feel like sooner or later, the opposing teams will be able to catch on to their play. They'll be outmatched against the other teams in the top six or in the race for the top four, and I think they'll eventually be put in their place. I think they will be just outside of the top four, though. I think they'll be put in fifth. I think they will make fifth, but as for in comparison to Tottenham, City, and Manchester United, I don't think that they will be. I don't think that they'll be up there. Now, my reasoning for Chelsea not being in there is actually because I think Chelsea, even though they did make a lot of purchases, and you can refer back to my last video when I was talking about Pep Guardiola's first year at Manchester City, making a lot of purchases doesn't necessarily mean that everything will work. Now, I'm not saying that results aren't needed, nor should they not be demanded. They should be demanded because of spending that amount of money, you need to get results. But do I think that this year they'll get it working and they'll get those, top results? No. I think Chelsea still need maybe another year with Lampard to be able to get these players in, maybe shore up the defense. Whatever their issues may be, I do believe they need another year and possibly another window. Now, Tottenham have been one of the lowest conceding sides in the Premier League. They are second to Manchester City. They've conceded 15, whereas Manchester City have conceded 13. So you can see that Tottenham aren't struggling to defend either in comparison to Manchester City, but it's mainly just the lack of goals. Both teams are underperforming in the goal section, with Tottenham scoring 29 and Manchester City scoring 24. Both teams with a game in hand. Manchester City have 2, Tottenham have 1. So again, stats don't tell you the full story. Tottenham, when they were struggling with their bad run of form, they were having the same struggles as Liverpool. They were defending fine. They would maybe, concede only 1 goal a game, but they would just struggle to get the shots on target. They were struggling to score. They just had a bad run of form. But recently, they're starting to perform better. They're scoring the goals again. So it's a good sign for Tottenham in the fact that they've been able to keep their defense solid. It's just the struggles on the offensive side. And it's also a good sign for Liverpool, because Liverpool have way more talent, way more capabilities than that Tottenham squad, and they have experience. They've won the Champions League and the Premier League. So, again, that's why I do believe that Liverpool will come out of their rut eventually. Manchester City, they will not finish outside the top 4. If they finish outside the top 4, it would be extremely disappointing, but I don't believe that they will not, mainly because of the fact of what I said with Liverpool. They have a lot of experience, title winners, great talent, great manager, so they won't finish outside the top 4. Manchester United have conceded actually quite a lot of goals out of the teams in the top 10. Actually, they've conceded the most. They've conceded 24, but they've scored 33. They've lost 3, won 10. So this tells me that in the games that they've conceded, which is nearly every game, they've conceded at least 1 goal. That means that they're either, when they lose by a lot, and then when they win maybe 1-0, 2-1, because just going off of the goals for and goals against, when a team has conceded that many but only lost 3 times, it tells me that when they lose, they've maybe lost by a lot of goals, or they maybe lost by a lot of goals, but in the games that they've won 10 games, which is a lot. 10 wins out of 16 is actually very, very good. So, in comparison to the goals for, where they've scored 33 goals, it tells me that in the games that they win, they've been close. Maybe they win 2-1, 3-1. So they're not keeping a lot of clean sheets, but they're winning games. And maybe for them, if they shore up the defensive side, which is actually looking pretty reliable over these past couple weeks, their defensive side for Manchester United is actually not looking too bad. So I feel like if they can maybe get their defensive side of the pitch sorted out, it's possible that they could be in the title race. It's possible that they can maintain this form and they can challenge Liverpool, City, and even Tottenham if Tottenham starts scoring goals again and banging away wins. Let me know who you think is going to win the title. Let me know who you think is in your top 4. If you are not subscribed to the channel, subscribe already. If you like the video, like it. If you feel like other people would like this kind of content, share it. And thanks for watching.